I'm Timothy Ko. I'm the CEO of Entheon Biomedical. Before I start, I'd just like to thank Andrew, our wonderful CSO, for articulating the history and science of DMT, as well as outlining the clinical pathway that lies ahead of us. I'd also like to thank Matthew Johnson, who's been an invaluable asset to us, and also an invaluable asset to the space and industry in highlighting some of the possibilities and realities of psychedelic research. Of course, I'd like to also thank PsyTech for hosting such a thoughtful and engaging event. And before I go into what Entheon does, I want to make an acknowledgement that none of the research that we do would be possible without the centuries of wisdom and practice of traditional indigenous cultures that have utilized these medicines to heal people long before us. So to all mentioned, thank you. We came to be as a reaction to the sort of growing opioid crisis that's gripping Canada and I think the globe. Sadly, my brother was a casualty of that crisis. He was a multi-decades-long drug user, and we lost him to an accidental overdose in March of 2019. Though his passing was incredibly difficult, and it was very uniquely complex and took shape over the course of 2 decades, and it's very much uniquely our story, we do believe that it's a far too familiar experience for thousands of sufferers and their families. So 3 years ago, I became responsible for the care of my brother, who already had many failed attempts at residential drug treatment, and over the course of those decades was on a multitude of psychiatric medications, including medication-assisted therapies such as methadone and Suboxone. In those 2 decades, he had multiple exposures to 12-step abstinence-based recovery, as well as considerable time spent with psychotherapists, psychiatrists, etc. Though he experienced moments of sobriety, successes and failures throughout that time, once again, about 3 years ago, his situation became quite dire. And as most families face, we had a choice about how best to care for him. And of the options available, residential treatment for many, as was the case with us, seemed like the right option. And what followed in the 2 years that I cared for him was a case study in the limitations of what the conventional methods have to provide substance use disorder sufferers. Over the course of those 2 years, I saw my brother admitted into and kicked out of multiple drug treatment centers, living on the streets, in shelters, hospitalized, ultimately landing in a mental health institution following a failed suicide attempt in a medicalized drug treatment center. During the course of those various institutionalizations, he was put on a host of drugs, ranging from, as described, medication-assisted therapies like methadone and Suboxone, but also antidepressants, antipsychotics, anxiolytics, mood stabilizers, while receiving therapies that range from electroconvulsive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, a whole host of other psychotherapies, and things like mindfulness coaching. Along the way, he was assessed and treated by dozens, if not hundreds, of doctors, therapists, nurses. Despite the sincere efforts of all involved, including my brother, nothing fundamentally changed. Rather, things seemed to worsen as new medications and psychotherapies were added to his regimen. And things that were intended to treat him actually further suppressed him. So the logic of the conventional model is to reduce drug-seeking impulsivity and suppress psychiatric symptoms through medication. And on that base layer of stability, the premise is that some meaningful introspective work can take place that will yield some core truths, facilitate changes in perception, and hopefully yield changes in behavior. The logic of that approach is sound in theory, but is evidenced by the fact that so many drug users are failed by these types of treatments. There appears to be some unseen force at play that renders many of these sufferers treatment resistant. What is true of my brother's story, as well as the stories of many like him, is a connection to trauma. Trauma can take on many forms and have many sources, but the presence of it can create therapeutic barriers that are difficult to address using the conventional methods. Long-term habituated drug use in and of itself can be deeply traumatizing as needs go unmet for long periods of time and fundamental notions of safety are eroded. And individuals in the throes of hardcore substance use disorder can experience alienation and other traumatic events sort of associated with the lifestyle. A result of trauma can be inflexible beliefs ranging from perceptions of self-worth to basic concepts of safety, perceptions of the world, connectedness to others, and things like just general optimism and outlook. Andrew may have covered it in more scientific terms, but the general default thinking or the ways of thinking that are established in drug use are quite entrenched, and so sometimes it's difficult to have new experiences around sort of familiar stimulus. The inflexibility of these beliefs paired with sort of common trauma responses of aversion, suppression, dissociation render psychotherapies ineffective, as was the case with my brother. The current state of addressing a substance use disorder is obviously insufficient if you look at the statistics. In Vancouver, over the course of the pandemic, we lost on average 4.7 people per day to accidental drug overdose. So from the beginning of January till the end of September, that's 1,200 people. And for context, the COVID-19 pandemic claimed the lives of 253 people in that time. And I want to highlight that because I think we saw, with regard to the pandemic, a highly mobilized and concerted effort on behalf of the population and government for a public health crisis. Just purely looking at the numbers, I think we exist in a comparable, if not more apparent, public health crisis with regard to drug overdoses. And the other statistics are quite shocking. Lives lost to drug overdoses in 1 year, ending in February of 2019 in America, number at nearly 70,000. That number, of course, is smaller in Canada, but it's still grossly unacceptable, sitting at about 16,000 for a 4-year period. In Canada, alcohol claims the lives of about 14,000 people, and in the sort of same amount of time in the US, it claims the lives of about 88,000 people. The reason why we talk about this is because of our fundamental understanding of what drives substance use disorders. We understand them to be issues not just of a appreciation of substances, but generally driven by very deep internal matters of motivation, emotional and psychological, and to self-medicate for a state of life that for many, they just simply can't tolerate. We believe nicotine also falls into this category. It's often just sort of accepted as a feature of our society, but every year it kills nearly 500,000 people in the United States, and in Canada about 1/10 of that. But the death numbers alone, death being the worst possible outcome of any of these substance use disorders, don't tell the entirety of the story. There's a vastness of complexity that surrounds these things for people that continue to suffer, who haven't yet met that fate. Statistically, in 2017, there was an estimated 20 million people aged 12 and older that were in need of substance use disorder treatment, and yet only 4 million people received that treatment. It's very obvious that there is an apparent gap in terms of accessibility. There are millions of people who don't receive treatment that need it. The market for the types of treatments that the people that do receive it get is quite massive, numbering $16 billion range. But sadly, as I will demonstrate, that number is made up of treatments that are oftentimes ineffective or overly costly. The reality is that with some of the treatments, for those that can find it, as mentioned, the efficacies are rather low and the cost of treatment is quite high. Looking at residential treatment, a stay in a residential treatment center can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 with efficacy as low as 10%. When you think about that, and sort of just understanding that most drug users, or a lot of them, will undertake multiple drug treatment stays, the costs over the lifetime become quite significant. 12-Step Recovery is an amazing resource for those that can access it and is a no-cost resource, but the efficacy rates there in terms of long-term sobriety are also quite shockingly low. There is some hope to be had with medication-assisted therapies such as methadone and Suboxone to provide that sort of basic level of stabilization and to reduce drug-seeking urges, but in theory, it does simply replace one substance dependence with another, and in isolation doesn't drive at the core of the motivating factors or the deep personal, emotional, and psychological issues that promote that behavior. So the numbers are staggering in regard to the deaths in the untreated populations and the sort of low levels of efficacy, and the treatments currently available are often disparate, ranging in efficacy, not scientifically backed, and don't come together cohesively to form a reliable treatment program. So it's obvious that a new paradigm is needed that is cohesive, evidence-based, and facilitates the meaningful internal transformations that are needed to achieve new behavioral outcomes. So ayahuasca, LSD, psilocybin, ibogaine, these are all molecules and compounds that we know to have the potential to promote these powerful, massively powerful experiences that can be transformational, insightful, and help to reconfigure the individual's understanding of self and their blockages, their traumas, their attachments, and really reconfigure their understanding of the world that they inhabit. And it's the hope that these realizations trigger the necessary changes in belief and behavior that are necessary to disrupt the substance use disorder cycle. But due to the complexity of each individual's issues, each patient requires a comprehensive, individualized, patient-centric approach. Within that, safety and preparation are absolutely paramount. Psychotherapy is very much needed in preparation for the psychedelic event to establish some of that context and intent, especially just preparing for what may be an experience that they've never had before. Once that psychedelic event takes place and these various experiences, visions, and emotions are brought to the surface, it's necessary to take those experiences and meaningfully integrate them back into context so that the person can consolidate. And this must be guided with the help of psychiatric support or psychotherapeutic support. And it's a hope that these powerful experiences can yield the profound realizations and changes in belief that are necessary to trigger that behavior. And though our clinical trials are focused on the safety and efficacy of the drug product, our strategy is to follow the path where alongside that we also develop out the supporting architecture that supports, tracks, and optimizes the patient experience. And we're exploring partnerships and affiliations to optimize those surrounding structures. But at the core of our program is a continuous infusion of synthetic pure DMT as described by Andrew. And I think just to echo what he said, we are creating an optimal delivery tool that's cost effective and safe, and we believe has benefits that are as of yet not conceived of with longer form psychedelics. In order to create this new paradigm of treatment, it is absolutely necessary to consider some of the business and financing realities. So this slide demonstrates that we have sort of engaged a three-corner amalgamation which we believe will adequately capitalize us to carry out our scientific endeavors and give us future positive cash flow in order to do further research. We're very eager to embark on our clinical pathway. We are intending on developing that to the rigors of the science that are required of us, but also in parallel to that, developing out these different facets of the more holistic approach. We hope that the results are development of a new paradigm that treats patients at the source of their issues and helps them access the internal wisdom. None of this would be possible without the amazing team that we've assembled, of which Andrew Hegley is central. We'd like to thank all of our scientific advisors who've been so informative to us just in terms of our understanding of the psychedelic space and for being so deeply involved in the development of our protocols. So to all the members of our team and to PsyTech Summit, I just want to express so much gratitude, and we hope that you follow us in our progress along this pathway. Thank you so much.